This happened just a month ago in late October. Where I live, we were having non-stop rain almost every day, and it was pouring hard. I work as a night security guard for an old manufacturing plant that's out on the edge of the city. The place is surrounded by thick woods, and it always felt kind of creepy, especially when it was raining. Usually I'm supposed to patrol outside, but when it's storming, they let me stay inside. At first I thought that was a good thing. I was wrong. My shift started at 8 p.m., and by the time the last worker left and I locked up, the rain was hitting the windows so hard it sounded like a drum line. The wind was howling like crazy, making the old metal walls creak. The plant was a maze of huge old machines, narrow hallways, and shelves piled high with dusty parts. It was cold, and the lights buzzed above me like they were annoyed. By midnight, I was getting tired, leaning against the wall and staring out at the rain when I heard this loud metal thud echo through the building. It sounded like something heavy and metal groaning or scraping. My stomach dropped, and I felt all the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or maybe the building shifting, but I had to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the main hallway. The beam was shaky, casting weird shadows that seemed to move. The plant had a bunch of corridors that led to different wings full of old equipment. I swept my light down each one, feeling the silence press in on me. My heart was pounding in my chest. Then I got to the last corridor. That's when I saw it. A door at the end, cracked open just enough that the darkness spilled out. I stopped, feeling a chill run through me. Was that door open before? I couldn't remember. I took a deep breath and walked toward it. My boots echoed with each step, and it felt way too loud. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and weak. Nothing, just darkness and the sound of rain hitting the building. I was ready to turn around when I heard it. A voice. Low and scratchy, like someone whispering from somewhere deep in the room. "Come here," it said. I froze. My heart felt like it stopped. My flashlight shook in my hand as I pointed it into the room, but it was too dark, and the light didn't reach far enough. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Come, here." I could feel my hands getting sweaty, and my instincts were screaming at me to run. "Who's there?" I managed to say, but there was only silence. I took a step back, and then I heard footsteps, fast, unsteady, like someone running but stopping suddenly. "Nope," I whispered and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my radio. "This is security," I said, my voice cracking. "Possible intruder. Need police now." I backed away from the door, my eyes locked on it, waiting for it to burst open. The building felt like it was closing in on me, every sound sharper, every shadow darker. It felt like forever before the red and blue lights flashed through the rain-soaked windows. The police went in with their flashlights, cutting through the dark. I stood outside, shaking and soaked from the rain that blew in when they opened the doors. A few minutes later, one of the officers came out, his face pale. "You should see this," he said. The security footage showed a man, ragged with wild eyes, sneaking in through a side door that hadn't been secured properly. He moved strangely, almost like he was limping. In his hand was a knife. He went into the room I was just in and stood there waiting. When I slammed the door and ran, he stepped back into the shadows. The last thing on the tape was him slipping away before the cops arrived. No one knew who he was or what he wanted, but that whisper, "Come here," still haunts me. I quit the next day and found a day job. I'd had enough of the night. About a month ago, my friend Mark and I decided to do a bit of camping. We found this spot way out in the woods of northern Idaho, recommended on an app Mark swore by. It was late October, so the air had a bite to it, and the woods were full of that eerie, quiet beauty that only fall brings. We were completely alone, not another camper in sight. It seemed perfect. The first night went by without a hitch. We set up our tents, cooked some instant noodles, and talked around the fire until the flames turned to embers. The cold made it hard to sleep, but it wasn't unbearable. The next morning, we woke up early, had some breakfast, and decided to hike up a nearby trail we'd spotted on the way in. It was about a 4-hour round trip, and by the time we made it back, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. That's when we saw him. A guy, maybe in his 40s, stood just outside our campsite, near Mark's tent. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at the tent like he was trying to remember something. Mark called out, "Hey, can we help you?" The man's head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked quickly into the woods. We exchanged glances. It was weird, but he was gone, so we brushed it off. We checked our stuff, and nothing was missing or messed with. We chalked it up to some strange hiker who got lost or curious. The rest of the day was quiet, but that uneasy feeling never really left. As night fell, we built a fire and sat close, the shadows of the trees creeping around us. We talked, trying to shake off the weirdness of earlier. Mark eventually got up to take a leak and walked a few yards into the woods. A minute later, he was back, moving fast. "There's someone out there," he said, his voice tight. My heart dropped. "You sure?" I asked. He nodded, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of forest. He said he couldn't see much, but there was definitely a person standing just beyond the tree line watching. We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the woods. Nothing. Just black trees and cold silence. We sat back by the fire but didn't let our guard down. Mark was convinced it was the same man from earlier, and I started to believe it too. Why would he come back? We debated whether to pack up and leave, but Mark pointed out that if the guy wanted to steal something, he'd already had his chance. This felt like something worse. We didn't wait to find out. We threw everything into our backpacks, stomped out the fire, and started down the narrow trail that led back to the parking area. The woods were pitch black, our flashlights barely cutting through the dark. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made my heart race. We never saw him, but the whole way, it felt like we were being watched. The woods were too quiet. Finally, we reached the clearing where my car was parked. Relief washed over me for a split second, until I saw the tires. All 4 were slashed, the rubber torn to shreds. We stood there stunned, the forest around us pressing in. "We need to go, now," Mark whispered. Before we could even think, we heard movement behind us, heavy footsteps crunching leaves. We jumped into the car and slammed the doors. I didn't care about the tires. I just started the engine and floored it. The car lurched forward, the rims grinding on the dirt road as we tore out of there. It was slow and loud, but it was moving. We didn't stop until we reached the main road. Later, we called the police in a tow truck. The cops found no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. The man had only wanted to keep us there. What he planned to do next? I don't even want to think about it. I haven't been camping since, and I'm not sure I ever will. Three years ago, in late October, I took a job at an all-night convenience store on the edge of town. The store was small, surrounded by thick woods and a single, cracked highway that rarely saw traffic after dark. Halloween night promised to be quiet, with most of the town busy celebrating or tucked in for the evening. I settled in for my 8 p.m. shift, a mix of boredom and unease simmering in the back of my mind. As the night deepened, the streets outside were eerily silent. The only noise came from the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of fallen leaves. By 10 p.m., a chill had settled in the air, creeping through the gaps in the old warped windows. I busied myself by rearranging stock and scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the hollow feeling of isolation. The bell above the front door rang suddenly, snapping me out of my reverie. I turned to see 4 figures enter. They wore full-face Halloween masks that gleamed under the harsh store lights. One a grotesque clown, another a skeletal demon, the third a faceless white mask, and the last dressed as a scarecrow with straw protruding from the cuffs. These weren't teenagers or even young adults. The way they carried themselves, the bulk of their bodies, These were grown men. "Hey folks, happy Halloween," I said, forcing a smile. The clown mask turned toward me, eyes glinting from behind the plastic, but none of them replied. Instead, they dispersed, moving silently through the narrow aisles. A sense of dread prickled at my skin. The store's ancient security camera above the register whirred as it tracked their movements, but I doubted its grainy footage would do much if something happened. My eyes darted to the emergency phone under the counter, a lifeline should I need it. After a few tense minutes, the man in the faceless mask placed a pack of gum and a bottle of water on the counter. I rang him up, heart thudding as the others loitered in the aisles. "That'll be $2.50, I said, voice wavering. He pulled out a crumpled bill and handed it over, his gloved hand brushing mine. It felt cold and rough, like sandpaper. As I handed back the change, the scarecrow mask walked up and flipped the bolt lock on the door with a loud click. Panic surged through me. Before I could react, the man in the clown mask lunged, slamming me against the wall behind the register. My head spun, vision blurring as I felt rough zip ties cinch around my wrists. "Please," I gasped, "just take the money." But they didn't want money. The skeletal demon pulled a roll of duct tape from his pocket, tearing a piece off with a brutal rip and pressing it over my mouth. My muffled screams echoed in my ears as they dragged me toward the back of the store. Suddenly, headlights flashed across the front windows, cutting through the darkness. The sound of a car door slamming and hurried footsteps followed. "Police! Open up!" The men froze, a silent exchange passing between them before they bolted for the back door. They vanished into the night just as two officers burst in, guns drawn. One found me trembling on the floor, the other chased after the fleeing shadows. Later, I learned that the police had been on alert after reports of men in masks approaching houses and attempting to lure children outside with promises of candy. The patrol had stopped by just in time. What the masked men planned to do that night, I don't know. And I'm not sure I ever want to. I'm not.